If you wait until 3 days before the exam and go, well, I'm going to call off the last 3 days before the exam and I'm going to study from sunup to sundown, that is a tsunami of information. And nobody can hold on to a tsunami. I mean, instead, just take a little bit every day, a little bit every day. That works a lot better for retention. There's best practices on everything, and there's best practices on retention of information as well. There's people who have PhDs on studying, believe it or not, how to give exams. They work at places like PSI exams, okay? That's what they do.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this week's episode of First Case, we are speaking with Wendy Zander, and Wendy is the founder of Zander Perioperative Education, and we are talking all about the CNOR exam today. How do I study for this exam? And I have taken the CNOR exam, and I know that it's very daunting and can be quite terrifying. So having somebody to point you in the right direction and say, hey, here's some good tips, I want to know all the tips. And so today we're going to be talking to Wendy and finding out what some of those tips are from someone who teaches.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Wendy, it is a pleasure to have you here today to help break down this exam and take away some of our fears as we get ready to study for it.
Well, thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you back in the studio. And for those of you listening who don't know, Wendy has been a guest on the First Case podcast before, all the way back in season 1. Wendy, you were one of our earliest supporters. So for all of you listening, I would encourage you to go back and listen to her interview. It's all about certification. So just go back to season 1 and look up episode 2. Like I said, she was right at the beginning. But Wendy, please go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone and just share a little bit of your background with us.
Well, I am Wendy Zander, and I was performance improvement manager at a large level 1 trauma center, and I had been an OR educator before that. I had recovered patients before that, before being in the OR. So all things surgical services. When I became the performance improvement manager, my job was making this kind of stuff real in the OR, and I really, really liked it. But the person who took the education job from me did not want to continue the little CNOR prep course I had going on for my students, so I continued doing it. Because I had a 100% pass rate in the area, hospitals around the area started asking if they could send people to our program. And my director was fine with that because it was actually a little bit of a recruiting tool for him. To have, people who were sitting for certification from our area in his classroom. He thought that was a great idea. But we continued with a 100% pass rate for several years. And my local AORN chapter asked me if I would do it for them as a fundraiser. And so I got contact hours for it and did that for them as a fundraiser. And they made money. And I went, hey,
I could do this.
I could do this for a job. So I thought it was going to be my little part-time job, but it did end up eating my life. And so this is all that I do now. I went back into the OR during the pandemic. I became the surgical services educator. So I had L&D, pre-op, post-op, OR, and sterile processing. But I still continued to do this online, and then we started scheduling classes again. So I thought the pandemic was probably the end of Zander Perioperative Education, but and by the way, that name was named by the accountant that helped me fill out the paperwork to make
Oh,
it a real
really?
business. Yeah, I didn't have a name for it. He's like, well, what do you do? And I said, well, perioperative education is what I do. And he said, okay, so let's call it Zander Perioperative Education. I said, yeah, that'll be
Okay.
fine. Now, I'm thinking this is to fill out for tax purposes, or I probably would have thought about it longer.
Hey, whatever works.
Yeah, that's how I came about doing it. So it's a real Forrest Gump way into preparing for certification, but it's something that I think is really important because as having a background of education and performance improvement, I know that what you need to know to pass the exam shows a level of expertise in your field and a level of understanding of what you're supposed to be doing every day that is beyond what you might get in a place right after orientation. So it shows a depth of understanding because unfortunately, in the beginning, you think your job is to go get stuff. I have to go get stuff. But that's a waitress. Your job is not to go get stuff. There's a lot more to it. And if you think your job is a gopher, then you're missing it. It's not your job. So the level of understanding that's required to pass the CNOR exam means that you've moved past that novice. And now that you're showing your expertise, better patient outcomes.
I took your prep course back in 2017 and I passed on the first try. I was stressed, of course, because it was a test and I hadn't taken a test since I was in nursing school way back in the day. But still, I studied, I took your advice and I passed. And so hopefully we can pass on some of those tips and that advice through this podcast and through your interview today. And one of the things that I really wanted to hit on, it's something that you talked about when you did the prep course that I was in, but you talked about preparing for the test. Like, how do I prepare? How should I study? Maybe how long should I study? So I was curious if you could kind of hit on some of those tips and some of that advice today.
Great. Well, I think that it is really helpful to be able to break down the information into smaller bits because it's overwhelming. I mean, if you think of the amount of education that you could possibly do in surgical services, your whole career isn't enough to learn all of it. I mean, it's just not. I've been teaching this course myself for 20 years, since 2004. Every time I teach it, somebody asks me something that I don't know in the classroom, every time, and I have to say, well, I'm not sure, but let's look that up. You know what I mean? And then while they're testing or something, I'll look it up because I have all my textbooks actually on an app on my phone.
Nice.
So I can look it up while they're sitting there in the test. So I think that breaking it down into smaller pieces, I get real specific in our program, the things that I know that you need to know. We're going to follow the outline of the exam. We're going to follow the subject areas, but I'm going to get real detailed in each one of the subject areas. So what we study is the right stuff. So I encourage people that while you're going through certainly my program, but any program, anything that you think, look, if I were not studying today and instead I were taking the exam today, what of this information do I not want to see on my exam? What's going to give me trouble? And when you do that, you identify an area of weakness for yourself. You identify a gap in your knowledge base. And then I encourage people to look those items up, to look up those things that they mark in their notes as something that would give them trouble if today were exam day, because you can't study everything. You can't study everything. And it's about circulating, not about scrubbing. So if you scrub for a living, you have to put your circulator's hat on to go take this exam. Also, it is a little bit of everything. It is not just one service. It's not even just intraoperative. It's pre-op, post-op, sterile processing, anesthesia. So if you go in there thinking, well, I've been an OR nurse for the last 25 years, and I certainly know how to do the OR, but you don't know sterile processing, but you don't know pre and post-op, but you don't really know anesthesia's portion of it, you're still going to struggle with the exam. Only about a third of the exam is specific to intraoperative nursing. And it is also a little bit of everything. So you can't go in thinking, well, I hope there's a lot of ortho questions since I do ortho.
I didn't get enough of those. I'll say that.
It's not, is that what you do for a living?
Yeah, I do ortho.
Yeah. So if you go into the exam hoping for a specific service, you're going to be disappointed. But that is actually the good news, because it isn't about specific procedures, really. It's that general information that you need to know to circulate anything. Like, if you have a good preference card, you can pretty much wing it on anything. If you have a good preference card.
If you have a good preference card.
Yeah, if you have a good preference card. But that's what you need to know, that basic knowledge to circulate anything. Now, there are some questions on the exam that are really specific to a type of surgery. And if you don't do that kind of surgery, you're not going to know it. But there's only a handful of those, and you can't possibly study every specific procedure out there. So it is looking at circulating, general knowledge, but pre, intra, post, sterile processing, anesthesia, in addition to intraoperative. See how it's overwhelming? I'm trying to make it concise and it's still overwhelming.
But still, it's helpful to think about, okay, anyone coming into the exam has at least been in the OR for 2 years. And so they can look at it and say, okay, I kind of feel comfortable at least with this area, but I know I don't know this. So if I'm looking at where I really need to spend time and study, then maybe sterile processing is where I really need. And that was for me. Sterile processing was my Achilles heel. I'm like, I got to learn this because I don't know enough about this area.
Well, we got people for that.
Exactly.
Nobody's asking me, when I'm at work, nobody's going, what spore testing do I need for a gravity displacement Steve sterile? Nobody's asking me that.
Exactly.
And there's questions about ethylene oxide sterilization, which they don't even use generally in ORs anymore. It's used in manufacturing. And to have to know what spore they use for manufacturing type of sterile processing for Foley catheters. Okay, wow.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. So when we first begin the class, our first module is test taking strategies. I tell them right from the beginning, this is the right information. I'm going to get really specific about it. So anything that you think, if today were exam day, I'd struggle, I want you to put an X, a check mark, a smiley face, a star, something next to that information, because I touch on everything I know you need to know. But if you don't have a good foundation, if you're like, I've never heard of ethylene oxide sterilizers before, this is just one slide. I'm talking about ethylene oxide sterilizers. So if you've never heard of them before, you need to go look that up in the Barry and Cohn or Alexander's book. There are only 4 sources that exam writers use for test questions. And that's Barry and Cohn Operating Room Technique, 14th edition. Alexander's Care of the Patient in Surgery, 17th edition, although I think you can get away with 16th still. The Drains Peri-Anesthesia Nursing, 8th edition, and I think you could still get away with 7th edition, by the way. And the AORN Guidelines. But they update the exam every July 1st. So the first part of the year, you're actually testing to the previous year's guidelines. So even though, coming up January 1st, we'll have the 2025 guidelines available, you're still testing the 2024 guidelines through July 1st of 2025. So I think that even though the Barry and Cohn book, I feel like you need the 14th edition, I actually think the rest of them you could get away with one older.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Yeah, that was helpful too.
Tricks.
Yeah, when I took your class, we talked about, hey, when are you taking the test is kind of going to determine when exactly with the new guidelines with AORN, especially that you're going to need to know these things. And I took my test in March, and so I was like, okay, this is when mine's going to fit,
yeah. And that July 1st really scares people because they think, oh, they're rewriting the whole exam, and they're not. There are 15 questions on every exam. They're being tested or validated for future exams, and all that happens on July 1st is a couple of those go on to the scored portion, the ones that made the grade, and maybe a couple of order things fall off. So it's not a big rewrite.
It's not as terrifying, yeah. But when
Mm-mm.
we're thinking of terms, though, thinking about studying in general, what do you recommend for people who are going to study? How long should they study before they go take the test?
Now, CCI recommends 3 months, but I do keep my statistics of the people who have taken my class. And so afterwards, if they haven't told me that they passed, then we go and ask, how did you do? And of the people that respond, I can tell you it's about 6 to 8 weeks after my program that I recommend people test, even though CCI does recommend 3 months. So I hesitate to tell people, oh,
You don't have to do
pshaw,
that.
you don't need all that. But if you use our program, it is pretty clear. The top of the bell curve is at about 6 to 8 weeks. So I think that is just enough time for you to knock out those gaps in your knowledge base. But it's not so much time that you start losing momentum, start forgetting what we went through, because nobody can keep that up forever. I recommend that you study an hour a day every day for that 6 to 8 weeks after a program and before you test, because that 6 to 8 weeks, an hour a day gives you a slow drip of information. If you wait until 3 days before the exam and go, well, I'm going to call off the last 3 days before the exam and I'm going to study from sunup to sundown, that is a tsunami of information, and nobody can hold on to a tsunami. I mean, instead, just take a little bit every day, a little bit every day. And that works a lot better for retention. There's best practices on everything, and there's best practices on retention of information as well. There's people who have PhDs on studying, believe it or not, how to give exams. They work at places like PSI exams, okay?
Right. Well, and we need them. I know
do.
we do, but people
Yeah.
understand the process behind studying. And I know myself that a small amount taken in small doses each day is going to be better for me to retain information than trying to take it all in. Plus, if I save it all up to the last minute, I'm going to be so overwhelmed, I'm not going to do anything because I'm just too overwhelmed in the first place, right?
I got to tell you, though, that's not my natural inclination. I was a procrastinator in nursing school. I would wait until the day before and I would do an all-nighter.
Oh my gosh.
And I could find that I could pull it out, if I could pull that off if I tried real hard. But what that means is that you're stuffing everything into your short-term memory and not your long-term memory. So while it'll get you through, microbiology, for this, you want to retain it so you actually will fold it into your practice. So it's more than just the exam. It makes you better at the bedside. And it really does. I got to tell you, it was before I had certification. I could remember thinking, well, I can do my job. What in the world? Why are certified nurses supposed to be better nurse than I am? That can't be true. Until I started studying and found out the rationale behind why I do a lot of things that I do. And it gave me, like I said, a depth of understanding.
Yeah. I can echo that completely, because when I took the CNOR exam, I had not had Periop 101. It was more of a, hey, you have a pulse and you can, go in the room. So go do so, and so I kind of learned on the fly, on the job training, whatever, from various circulators who taught me. But I didn't have a lot of a good foundation. So I did a lot of that on my own. Like, why do we do this? Why are we doing it this way? And then I go sit in a CNOR exam prep class and I'm like, no way. No way, I didn't know that. Oh my gosh, I didn't know. And so like the gaps were filled in a lot of the things that I knew that we did, but maybe I didn't know why. Or maybe there was other things that I should have been doing that I had been doing wrong because I didn't know any better. And so like a lot of things that I learned definitely improved my practice, not just because I took the test, but because I studied for it and because I learned all of this content that now actually I feel like I'm a much better nurse. Yes, because I'm certified, but because I studied for that certification and I learned so much.
Yeah. So that's why you want to do an hour a day, little bit at a time.
Take a little bit.
Long-term memory.
So one of the things, too, I wanted to hit on before we wrap up our conversation, though, is about this is learning styles, because learning styles can also affect how well we do or how we study, right?
Right. There's auditory listening, there's visual, reading, textbooks, taking notes, and then there's also kinesthetic, which is hands-on. And being sedentary for a long time is just death to a kinesthetic learner. So trying to sit down and be sedentary for a long time is not best practice. Remember those people with PhDs? They will tell you kinesthetic learners need short bursts of study. So going over, there's actually 6 different learning styles that have been identified. And this is rigorous data. It's not just, what superhero are you Facebook quiz. It's university studies, but everybody's all 3. Everybody can learn by reading, listening, and doing. It's just we tend to lean more toward one or the other depending on how we're hardwired. And I just anecdotally, I don't have any studies to back it up, but just the nurses that I talk to, we have a very high proportion of people who are auditory and kinesthetic learners. And our public education system is based on visual learning because that's the majority of people in general. But I think people who gravitate to hands-on kind of jobs like nursing have a lot more kinesthetic learners than the general population. General population is only about 5%. And I can tell you a lot more people than that in my classroom are kinesthetic learners, which means being sedentary and having to read things for a long time or listen in a class for a long time is very difficult. So we talk about how to study while you're up and moving, to make sure that you're doing short bursts of study instead, ways to remain physically active while you're taking in the information, because there are real changes that happen in your brain that make you ready to retain information during and immediately after physical activity. So if you are sitting in, if you went on a long drive somewhere and you get out of the car and you're like a zombie walking. I mean, you're like, your head's all stuffed with cotton. It's because you've been sedentary too long and your brain's just going into a micro sleep, really, and not a great time to retain information. So studying I do recommend an hour a day, but for my kinesthetic learners, I say break that up. Set the alarm on your phone to go off, like the timer to go off in 15 minutes. And then, during that 15 minutes, you study. But that alarm's going off in 15 minutes. So you can really hyper focus. And then when it goes off, get up, move around, go do something else, and then come back for another 15 minutes in a little while. You still need an hour a day, but break it up if you're a kinesthetic learner. Or if you're an audio learner, I teach people to record their notes into an audio version. And I mean the things they look up. Listening to my class again. Now they get recordings. People have recordings of the class for months afterwards. And that's just the class again. But if you needed that foundation on ethylene oxide sterilizers, you need to make your own audio recording of the information you looked up on ethylene oxide sterilizers if you're an auditory learner. So not just listening to my recordings, but making some of their own too. And that's a lot more in nursing than the general population. So while our public education system may not focus on kinesthetic and auditory learner, then my study plan really has to, because that's how we study today.
Right, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is really helpful to break down the different learning styles. And honestly, I can see a bit of myself in each of the different styles, but I know for me, I have to be moving. I have to be going. Do not just plot me in a room and inundate me with information, because I'm not going to make it. I will not survive. And don't tell me to sit and read for an hour either, because I can't do it. But it's helpful to recognize that this isn't a problem with me. It's just a different learning style. And there are ways that we can adapt how we learn best so that we can succeed when we're taking the test and succeed as we prepare. And one of the other ways that we can really prepare is understanding standardized test questions. So what advice or tips do you have for understanding these kinds of questions and how we can make the most of our studying as we're getting ready for a test that is all standardized questions?
Right. Well, the exam is a multiple choice exam. And so there are 4 answers, 4 options, 1 correct answer, the end. There's no both A and C. There's no all of the above. There's no choose all that apply and you don't know if 2, 3, or 4 are correct. No, there's 4 options, 1 right answer. So when you're practicing doing any practice questions, make sure it's multiple choice. You don't want to practice test taking that you're not going to be actually using. So you should be looking at multiple choice questions, and also ways to, let's say you've got it down to a couple, because there's usually 2 answers that are really going to make you think. And then there's 2 that you can pretty much rule out right away. All right. So eliminate those 2. And then you'll have 2 that you really need to consider. And this is just basic multiple choice test taking. There'll be 2 that really make you think. So of those 2, there are some tips on how to make sure. Now, one is if you see one is in a different category than the other 3 answers. Now, I don't like this one for nursing actually, but an example would be, which one of these medications cause fasciculation, and vecuronium, atracurium, pavulon, succinylcholine. Well, the correct answer is succinylcholine, but the rationale is it's a depolarizing paralytic and the rest of them are non-depolarizing. So it's in a different category. But I find in nursing, if you can identify the category, you're probably not guessing. Okay, so I don't like that one. But there's also, when you have opposites, one's usually correct. So if one of the answers is hypotension and one is hypertension, I'd be looking at those 2 pretty closely, because I think it's just human nature for the people who are writing the exam questions. I mean, if you write a question and you know the right answer and the right answer is hypotension, I mean, what's the easiest wrong answer to dream up? It's
hypertension.
I mean, it's just easy to do. So when you have opposites, pay attention. One's probably correct. There's another one. If you have like a list of symptoms, like if they say, what are the early signs and symptoms of LAST, or what are the early signs and symptoms of malignant hyperthermia? It could be, if you read all 4 of those, one of them, like you'll have a list of symptoms, like maybe there's metallic taste in the mouth, there's dizziness, ringing in the ears, a feeling of agitation, and one of them has all those pieces. But as you read the other 3, they might be missing 1 or 2 of those. By reading all of them, you can see which answer has all of those pieces and parts without leaving anything out. So it's the all-inclusive answer is probably the right one when you have a list of questions. You should stay away from absolutes. You should not go for anything that says never and always. Okay, it should be like generally, usually, those kinds of things. And it's just human nature to want to defend the correct answer. So for the test writers, I sometimes notice that the correct answer is a little more wordy. It'll be a full sentence or 2 and a well thought out answer. And then if you look at the other 3, they are not complete sentences even. They could be phrases, partial sentences, or maybe a 1 to 2 word answer, which is just not as thought out.
That makes sense, yeah.
Those are some things that I've noticed, just some tricks to help you break it down once you get to the 2 that are really making you think.
Well, that is very empowering, though, to think, to be, okay, I'm armed with my tips. I can look at these questions and maybe not get so lost in all of the distractions that are going on with all of the answers, And
distraction is another one.
Yes, distraction's a big one.
Don't look for the nursing answer, too. So don't say, I'm going to order labs. That's a physician answer, physician's order, even though it might be a protocol order. But, the nursing answer would be notify the physician. So stick to the nursing answer. I'm sure as soon as we're done talking, I'm going to think of the one more thing I wanted to tell you. But those are the ones that are standing out.
These are fantastic takeaways. And as we come to the end of this conversation, you have given us so much to take away, to think about, to chew on as our small dose of another bit of prepping for the CNOR. But before we go, do you have any encouragement or any other final thoughts you want to give to anyone listening today?
Sure. This is stuff that you do every day. It is. I think that just wanting to do better at your own position, whatever your motivation is for getting the CNOR exam, like whether you get a pay raise, you're going to get a promotion, you want to be a first assistant. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, or it's just, just a personal goal for you. I have some people that are close to retirement that say it's just a personal goal. I wanted to be a CNOR. And so whatever your motivation for doing it is, you should also reap the reward, the personal satisfaction of knowing that you've got a job well done, that the level of care that you can offer to your patient has gone up with it. And when you're done studying, if you're passing this exam, then you've accomplished that. You've accomplished a knowledge base that allow you to take better care of your patient, to anticipate the needs of the surgical team so that we'll have better outcomes for the patient. So when I have orientees, I always tell them, pretend like the person on the table is the one that you love most in the world, whether that's your spouse, your child, your parents, whoever that is. And how do you want surgery to go for them? Well, that's how you want surgery to go for all of your patients. And this will help you do that. It'll help you do it. So you can do it, and you'll be glad you did it in the future as well. Not just a one and done, but it makes you better later on too.
That is excellent advice. Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That is all the time we have for today. And I want to encourage you to put a lot of these ideas and suggestions into practice. The CNOR exam can be daunting, but it's totally worth it. It's a benefit to you. It's a benefit to your patients. And join us next week as we flip the script and think now about how, as an educator or those who are doing training for staff, how can I best engage my staff in learning so that they can be engaged and apply the things that we're teaching into their practice. So on behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for listening to this week's episode of First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.